All right, Cabbage Café. Hear an echo. Do you guys hear it too?
I do not.
I think
I
it's
think it's
better.
better. Yeah. Oh no, it didn't. As long as you don't hear it, we're good.
I hear the echo.
Oh, nice. I thought I was gonna not have to do anything.
Yeah.
So I want to hear what you have to say, Adam, because I'm interested in an update on your surgery and other stuff you've been going through. But I did enjoy having to cut you off again. I came on just in time.
Oh,
Right before the show, I like to cut Adam off with whatever he says.
30-second warning thing. Yes.
I appreciate it. I'm getting used
to
it.
Oh, go ahead, man. Sorry.
No, we're doing all right. It's been a little rough. But switch some pain meds around, and we're doing okay.
Awesome. You're here. That's a good sign. You're sitting up and you're talking. Let's check in on our sponsors, and then we'll get a little bit more info from Adam.
We all know the Jazz Cabbage Café is sponsored by the Botanical Company, Redemption Cannabis, Real Leaf Solutions, Detroit Nutrient Company, GrowGreenMI.com, 40 promos including Culture Clothing.
Nice. It's me and Adam, as we were just talking to, Anton and Rick, to get this one started. We're going to have a few people on today. Lev from PSI Labs, talk about a couple different things, including he was just in an article that looked a little bit at the controversy over some of Viridis findings on their test results versus other labs, and advertisement or promotion of these really high THC numbers and in their own method and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but there's some other stuff too we'll talk to him about, and he's been doing the lab thing for a long time here in Michigan, and he's worked with a lot of caregivers, and some of the lawmakers are impressed by the concept of making the caregivers have to test their medicine even to give it to their own patients. And so I want to talk to him a little bit about that. I don't think any of us agree with that, but that is discussed in Lansing and has been. Obviously, we all are familiar with some of those bills, and we've had those conversations and have been to Lansing to tell them not to do it. So that kind of stuff is going on. And then we got to see the Sentence of Michael Thompson movie that's been touring around the country a little bit. Michael's been making appearances and letting people know about his story, and it is really cool. I saw it on Sunday with Rick and at the Capitol Theater in Flint, and very moving. It's not that long, but it's really intense. People should see that when they have the opportunity and learn a little bit more about this, and why this issue is so important. You see how many people's lives are affected so significantly, and from this type of overreach and this abuse and all the negative consequences of the war on drugs and targeting people and all that kind of stuff comes out in this story. And a family that was just kind of left behind, and a good guy had to take a big hit. So he's out trying to make a difference. And it was also kind of moving, like when they were addressing the crowd, they brought up guys who are going to be guests today on the show, Michael McCurdy and Marshall Clabeaux, who run the Michael Thompson Clemency Project. And they were listing off the names of a lot of the people who were still behind bars and in need of help and who they were working on. And a lot of those people's families were there, or, contingencies from their camp or whatever. And that was pretty moving too.
Some of those guys have been in there for 50 plus years.
Yeah. Some of the stuff they were reading off was just so absurd. It gets outside of cannabis and stuff. This is just like all just really stupid sentences and cruel, situations.
A lot of that goes to show the police corruption that was actually involved, and how unfair these people were treated by law enforcement before they even got to the court system.
In fact, Mike McCurdy mentioned one case where nobody believes the guy's guilty of the crime that he's there for. The prosecutor doesn't. The police agencies don't. None of the people do, but yet they cannot escape the fact he received a conviction and is stuck with it until some angel comes to rescue him. So, we've been fortunate to be that angel in some instances, but there's still so much work left to do.
That reminded me of the Leonard Peltier story. They all know that he didn't do it, but he's just taking the hit to represent punishment for that group, or however they look at it.
And in Leonard's case, the FBI have come out specifically and said, we want to hold this man responsible for what was done, whether he did it or not. I mean, there's a hatred of this man, and these law enforcement officers still show up to protest his release.
The incident in Ogalla that we're referring to with Leonard Peltier did result in the death of a couple of federal agents, and the federal government, eager to solve a crime where one of theirs has fallen, slapped it on Leonard, and they've just stuck with that, even though everyone knows that he's not guilty of the homicides.
There's a lot of information out there. There's been movies made. There's documentaries. There's people talking about it. Even recently, you can find stuff. We did a good show, I thought, to kind of go over the story. A lot of people who have been directly involved. We had, in fact, Leonard's son was on here. Gene Roach, who was on the territory at the time when the incident took place. We had Malcolm McKinnon, who's covered as a journalist for decades. That's a good one to go check out if you want to know a little bit more about this story. But there's lots of information out there. We should do an update on that.
We should. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of positive things we can update on, but I still think that our viewers are interested enough in that story that we should do that. And Leonard, of course, is an artist in jail, similar to Daryl Barking Dog Brown, who was spoke at EntheoFest last year too. Mm-hmm. Some of the Native American art that's out there is really stunning. And if you're in the market for a piece, you should consider shopping for something made by a native.
Hey, so last week we talked about, we spent a large part of the show talking about deli style versus packaging, and of course, they can mutually exist is ultimately, I think, the answer, and I think we determined that last week. But there was a formal hearing on it. There were some people, and it was at the offices of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, and it's an opportunity for public to get on record with their position on this. They threw in the issue. You could say whatever you want about what was going on with the department or the system or the commercial procedures or whatever you want that they're involved in. But they did throw out a question of deli style versus pre-packaging, and the people overwhelmingly were against prohibiting deli style. There are some people that said how much they love pre-packaging, but nothing prohibits them from doing that. They can continue to do the way that they think is best, with the advantages and disadvantages that were all discussed at some point or another during that thing. But there's no reason to prohibit no good reason that was brought up to prohibit the deli style, and no initial set of issues to point to have a problem to solve.
And for those of our viewers who may not be familiar with deli style because they're in states that don't have that option, deli style is where flowers ship in bulk and it's shown to the customer in large glass jars before purchase is made. They get a chance to smell it. It's weighed out directly in front of them and then packaged right in front of them, as opposed to prepackaged, which arrives already within 1/8 or 1/2 or 1 whole ounce packages. So
mainly eighths.
It's unique to Michigan, and it's a wonderful thing. We don't want to give it up.
That's right. And the prepackaged comes mainly in eighths, and people were consistently making the argument that if you wanted a 1/2 ounce or 1 ounce, that means you have several individual packages now, and you add up the garbage and the need for recycling and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the major arguments that we went over on this show last week were brought up during that thing, but it was overwhelmingly in favor of keeping the deli style. And then subsequently, Director Brisboe has put out a statement acknowledging that there's no plans for looking at this. It was obvious where the people are. And it was
a question from an interviewer, a little bit different than putting out a statement. But the interviewer said, what was the result of this? And he said, there's such negativity, we're not even considering it any longer. So
okay. He just made a statement based on the interview on a journalist question. Okay, I didn't know that was
right.
specifically it.
From the Mirror News Service, right?
I saw the the memed version of the
Brad
quote.
Forrester did that. He's so fucking cool. I love it.
And, that was cool. So, real quick, I guess Bradley Curtis Powell is wondering why there's not some type of thing that directly connects. That's on all of us. Over the years.
Well, I think there's a simple reason, and that is because how are you going to out people as caregivers? I mean, you're going to put a list of people out there so people know who's a caregiver and who's growing. I don't.
Law enforcement wants that really bad.
I know if I was a caregiver and I had 72 plants in my house, I wouldn't want to be on a list so that people could find me.
That's one of the reasons why there hasn't been an organized caregiver group.
Right.
Now, people have not wanted to come above board to let people know who they are potentially.
But let me point you back though, Jamie. In 2008, all we had was caregiver groups. We called them compassion clubs, and in local libraries and in local storefronts and all kinds of places.
When I say it's on us, and when there's a need for it, we got to put it together. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where those connections have taken place. You have an educational meeting, and you make those connections there, and people have discussions about who could help each other out.
I'm going to tell you, if there's people out there that don't know how to find a caregiver, all you got to do is start having a compassion club meeting, and everybody shows up. Start something.
That's an interesting point, man. It's probably time for there to be just old school, something that emulates or something that is the old school kind of compassion club meeting.
At this point, the medical program shrank 15% or 17% last month itself. The only people left in the medical program are those who truly, really, desperately need to have medical cards for medical purpose. So I still think it's completely valid to still have that service. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that this was done in such a way that I can see how somebody who just got into the cannabis scene and is figuring out that maybe they don't want to hit those dispensaries, but would like to find a caregiver and have no concept of how to find it, because caregivers don't advertise. It's all word of mouth. And that was the one nice thing about the compassion clubs is, and we all used to go to these different club meetings. I can remember going to club meetings because they invited me to come speak. And in that club, you would see literally two groups of people, well defined. You would see the patient, and then you would see the caregivers. And the caregivers were the folks that had the jars and had product and all. But you could go up to them and talk to them and meet different caregivers. Any meeting had 2, 3, 4 caregivers at it. And we need to get back to that just for the purpose of fighting against what the legislator's trying to do.
When that stuff's going on, the system is more functional. Those connections are more readily made and are available.
I'll tell you this: there's a ton of things going on this summer. There's regulated market events, and then there's unregulated market events. Big Cloud Farms, I think, has been very successful with some of their things too. Chris Martinez, of course, the bomber out west, always doing crazy stuff. There's just a lot of opportunity for people to gravitate towards those. In Genesee County, we've got a couple of social consumption clubs too, but the need to connect people is still there. In pediatric patients, as more and more people become familiar and comfortable with cannabis, more and more kids should be registering with the state in order to be able to use cannabis. But I think we've seen the numbers slowly trickle down and decline, and that makes me unhappy.
Yeah, well, I wonder why that is. I wonder what it is. Is it a fact that people are just seeing the program shrink and they're trying to get into the? I mean, what is the reason? I'm just curious.
I think most people no longer see a need to have a card. They recognize the medical value. They're still going to use cannabis for their child. They're just not going to sign up for the system.
You have to, the 2 doctors and all that kind of shit. Go ahead, right
now. Now that retail is available everywhere, you don't need a hookup.
Right, and it's now de facto legal, where the card in the past exempted you. Now except for driving, I see no reason to have a card. But you damn well bet I got one. Matter of fact, the new envelopes, I just put the stamp on it and sending it out today. But in my opinion, there's two things going on. One, it's a political protest. I would love to see 500,000 patients on a list at some point. I mean, we got to 300,000. What's a couple 100,000 more? So they're out there. They just don't see the need because, well, we have this regulated market that they can go into and get what they need. Now, they can't necessarily give it to their children without a card, but who's the wiser in many of these scenarios? And that's kind of helped to dull the need for a card. And I believe a lot of people don't understand why you would need a card or what a card would do for you, because there are dispensaries that are giving you the little kickback so you don't pay the medical, the tax. There are places that will treat you as a medical patient even though they're rec, meaning you can walk in and say, hey, what helps with this?
Well, and they often waive the 10% excise tax,
right?
too.
Yeah. And that's just showing that there's no reason. Now, I, again, would always have a card, A, so I could be one of those guys on that list. B, I want to see the system and I want to see how it works. And if the system doesn't have enough people in it, it's not going to work. And I consider it like a donation to the state, just like I do my when I get my license plate and I buy the stickers so I can get into state parks. I pay the $11 because that's my donation to the state park system. I don't even go some years, but it's worth it.
For veterans, I know we don't have a choice technically. The only way our benefits are legally protected through the VA is if you are legally complying and enrolled in a state-sanctioned program. Otherwise, technically, the VA can come after your benefits if you're just strictly from a rec standpoint. So I do think, at least in the veteran community, there's definitely a need to be able to have access to the cards and have that protection, because at the end of the day,
I'm not suggesting that they won't if they haven't, but have they?
It's my understanding that they're not necessarily coming after veterans for if they don't have the card. But what I do know is that if you don't have the card, they basically take punitive damages to the veteran by they won't renew medications, and they'll do other things. They deny you services because you're using illegal drugs if you don't have the medical card, right? So I think there's other ramifications other than the money benefits.
Right. People have been thrown out of housing too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So
remember, these attitudes change with the administration too. So what might be a safe harbor in 2022 might not be so safe in 2025. And what sick people need is a continuity. They need to be assured that they're going to have that service for the remainder of their days, because they don't have a choice. They need it.
That's a VA policy too. That's the other thing, is they have tried to codify that within legislation, and it keeps getting turned down. So if the VA wanted to change it, they can screw over an entire population of people.
Right. There's a difference between being protected
more so than they already
and
do.
just being subject to the current policy. Sorry, Anton.
Oh no, I was referring to what Anton said. They're going to screw people more than they already do. I'm very disappointed in the VA, and I'm not a military veteran, but how do you promise people something and then change what you promised? I mean, there are people that sign their name on a line expecting all kinds of things, and 20, 30, 40 years later when they retire, they're not getting shit.
What I find odd is that we can continue, and I'm in support of all these programs, but we can see veterans getting assistance with college education, veterans getting assistance with mortgages and housing, and those things seem to go pretty smooth and uninterrupted. But when it comes to healthcare, one place where smooth and uninterrupted really should be important, it doesn't seem like that's a priority of that group. And that's just so flipped around from where I would expect it to be.
Healthcare isn't a priority in this country. So I would be shocked and somewhat disappointed if the veterans had the greatest healthcare on the planet and the rest of us suffer the way we do. I mean, if this country really believed in medicine the way it does, we should take care of each other.
Michael
Period.
Thompson talked about when he was on stage, he talked about the privatization of the prison system where the food is privatized, healthcare is privatized. All these other services that are provided are privatized by companies, and those companies don't give a goddamn about the prisoners and things. And I think to a certain extent, we've seen that in government work as well, where so many services are privatized that, first of all, that guy's not even really sure who his boss is, who's the one signing the contract. And he doesn't have any allegiance to the citizen because he's not a public servant, really. He's just a contractor. So,
not only that, you have to, the way I look at it is nobody goes to medical school and graduates and says, holy shit, I'm going to go to the VA and do my fellowship.
Work for them. Right.
You get the bottom of the barrel healthcare workers that just barely made it because there's nowhere else to go. And that's what you get stuck with.
I will tell you what I learned in prison, and I'm sure it holds true for the VA. When you look at the licenses of nurses and doctors that work in the Department of Corrections, every one of them has a ding on their record. And that's why they're working for the state, because nobody would hire them with those kind of dings on their record. And I guarantee you, if you were to start looking up the background of doctors in the VA, you would see very much the same thing, except for, I believe, the guys, the corpsmen who put their life into medicine in the military and then decided that the proper thing was to find a hospital and work out of that.
The other loophole you got to remember is being a federal agency is, like you stated, Adam, you could have dings on your record. Let's say you got your license in, Alabama, and you have dings on your record, right? And you would never qualify for a license in Michigan, but because it's a federal agency, you just have to hold a license.
Right.
So you get these folks that sneak in the doors that aren't even qualified to practice in that state. Yet, because it's a federal bureaucracy, they get in the door and then they start putting their hands on people treating them.
Yeah. This is a system that is choking for cash. And obviously, throwing money at problems isn't always a good way to solve them. But it's pretty clear that what we've outlined today, and it wasn't even the intent of the show, it just evolved naturally as a form of conversation. What we've outlined today is an area of government which really could use an infusion of money. We talk about some of the things that we spend money on and some of the incentives that we give to giant industry. And Elon Musk pays $0 tax one particular year for he's one of the few billionaires in the land. So when we talk about the need, it's real, and we have to satisfy it one way or another. And I will say higher taxes on cannabis is not a solution. I heard that floated this week as a way to, at the Mackinac Policy Conference, there was a conversation about raising the cannabis tax in order to generate more funds for roads,
right,
or for something else.
Once again, potholes was a huge deal. And my biggest argument, and I tried to say this years ago, I have no problem taking high tax dollars in weed and putting it towards the failures that the legislature has. However, I wouldn't want any of those legislatures to have access to that money. So I say, let's put the money in escrow, wait till everybody's term limited out so that none of the people who are deciding where this money went have failed. Because right now, these people failed. Whoever was in charge of making the roads in Michigan a decent thing failed their job. I mean, and for us to come in and save the day, first of all, we're not getting the credit that we get for the money we do give. It's not like there's a big plaque on the Washtenaw County Courthouse that says, all these programs were funded by the marijuana tax we received.
I don't know exactly what Steve means. If somebody does answer him, otherwise maybe be more specific, man, so we can answer you.
Yep. I will say this, though, that cannabis has never generated enough tax dollars, and it doesn't matter. You could tax this at 35%. You're still not taxing enough dollars to make a significant dent in the roads budget.
Right.
The roads budget is so many billions of dollars each year. And we're only a $2 billion industry. So you're taking a little bit off a $2 billion industry where roads are funded at the hundreds. So when we look at it like that, seeking cannabis dollars as a solution to the road problem really isn't realistic. Adam's right, though. We don't get credit for the things that we do. Communities love to get that $56,000 a year for every retail environment, but what about all of the schools that benefit from what our money is? All about all of the
I totally agree that the roads require so much more resources.
Oh yeah,
than what can be contributed through cannabis. That I'd like the idea in some discussions with how to address, bringing resources to some social equity approaches to siphon off of go back if there's going to be changes made. If people are opening up the act, then let's do stuff like fund social equity programs and siphon that off of the roads where it could be more beneficial.
Why aren't we funding programs that teach people the positive parts of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana? Why is there no program like, the farm people, they have the Farm Bill puts money towards education on a positive thing, teaches you how to do what you need to do.
That may not be MRTMA because that's adult use. It would be a public service to do that, but it's specific.
The director's pretty direct with us when we meet with him every month. He can't spend money unless there's a legislative directive in order to do so. So if the legislature passed a bill that said the marijuana agency will do this, he would be able to do it, and he'd be able to take funds from his licensing bucks and utilize that. But until he gets authorization from the legislature, I don't think he can spend bucks.
No, right. But that's one of the things we need to teach the legislators is that you people have no clue what you're doing. Why don't you take some of the money and educate yourself?
That's a good way to warm yourself up to them.
Sure, yeah. You're an idiot. My name's Adam Brook.
But I understand.
I don't have to tell them they're idiots.
No, but that message pretty clearly conveyed.
You know what, though? They are not idiots, but they are people. And
but
they have to deal with a lot of different issues, and they can easily be confused on cannabis stuff.
Correct. They've outed themselves in the last few hearings that they didn't know what they were talking about, and they allowed us to educate them. And
lobbyists are marketing specialists, man. That's what they do. They market their concept that they're trying to sell to lawmakers, and they know their target audience. They know what the hot buttons are, and in an election year, bucks speak.
This is actually a perfect segue into what I first want to discuss with Lev, who's here with PSI Labs, and we'll talk about a few things. How you doing, man?
Good. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Very good. And I read the article today from MLive by Gus Burns.
Yeah.
And didn't realize you were a part of it when I asked you to come on here, but we definitely want to get into some of that.
Yeah, Gus reached out. He often contacts us when he just has questions about lab testing of the industry. We've had a long-standing relationship.
Right on. Very cool. Because that's some interesting stuff, and I was going to try to touch on some of that, but there's already something to kind of like base that discussion on, because I like some of the stuff you said in there and what that was about. We talked about how the lawmakers are not that well versed on cannabis, even those in support. That's why sometimes many of those who voted in support of 5512 thought they were doing something good for medical cannabis users. And that's, it's a difficult thing to combat. It's also difficult to combat a group of judges who want something and high-powered lobbyists, who've spent millions of dollars to get close with them, so it's a challenge. Sometimes it can work out for us because we do bring the truth most of the time, but it's difficult. And what I'm talking about specifically is the discussion about whether or not caregivers should be mandated to have to test their medicine according to industry standards before even passing it to their, directly connected patient. And obviously, I don't think anybody here, agrees with that. We've all talked about it a lot because it's been part of the anti-caregiver bills that, first came out in the House. Now there's some work being done from the Senate side with the idea of building some momentum. And in part, they would take away some caregiver rights, plant count. They would create an unrealistic and dysfunctional idea for caregivers to be able to bring cannabis back into the commercial market. And it would in part mandate caregivers to test their medicine, in the industry standard, via the industry standard, before even handing it over to their directly connected patient.
How could you enforce that?
Well, there's a few things to talk about. The overload on the labs. I believe we data get into it if you want to, but that's one of them. Overload on the labs. It's unnecessary too. There's a whole long list of it. It's a small garden. Plus, people can test. If they want to, and a patient can demand that become part of it if they bring on a caregiver, or the patient can take what they get from the caregiver and go have it tested. If
That's
it's
right.
not like it's not available. It's also a small garden situation. It's not a big commercial situation. And, we can talk about all that stuff, but one of the things that has impressed the lawmakers, even those on our side, is when Linder brought up records of these tests of caregiver product that was brought into the commercial market during emergency rule 19. And that scared, there's a lot of failure of microbials in that list. And that scared the, some of the lawmakers. So it's not reflective of the regular caregiver system. There was a lot of shenanigans that went on. There was no checks and balances in that system. They were just allowed to do it, and for a while they weren't even testing, and then they were testing after a bit. So,
well, and they're also missing the fact that currently a lot of stuff is remediated before it even gets tested. So it's somewhat of
a common caregiver doesn't do, right?
Right. It's somewhat of an unfair playing ground if you're going to say, hey, both of these items should be tested.
But
but Lev, really, we've got a lot of ground we've talked about here. But your comments in M Live were pretty direct, right?
Yeah, I think there's obviously some risk still associated with sort of maybe validity of the lab results, right? And so I think when you have questions like that, it does still bring up challenges to trying to evaluate the safety of sort of caregiver product versus licensed product in this apples to apples way. And I just say that I think there's a lot of areas in other kind of realms of consumption outside of cannabis where we do have a different standard for what we're purchasing depending on who we're purchasing it from and in what venue, right? Like if you go to a farmer's market and you're sort of directly buying from that farmer and you can see their entire spread and, you can go to their farm potentially or look it up on the web. A lot of that stuff may have a different burden of sort of standards than you might get from if you're buying from a grocery store where they're working with distributors who have certain, buyers whose job it is to look at quality control of the products they're getting. It's just different systems in place. And I think, the concept that we should still be able to seek out a caregiver who's got a small operation that you can see, be able to utilize their services, more freely without kind of the same burdens as the licensed market, I think is kind of a pretty natural concept and absolutely one that should remain. And in terms of, whether or not the product is good or bad or safe, according to the state standards, the idea really is that, when you're bringing it into the market for the regulated market, it should be tested. And if it fails, it fails. That's the system working, right? That's the system in theory kind of removing this product that isn't up to standard to make it to commercial shelves. But it really shouldn't be used as evidence that one group of growers is better or worse. I don't think you often hear as much about the failures of big companies, even though they exist, right? There's still recalls for Jif peanut butter and stuff. And once it gets big enough, you start to hear more about it. But I think there's, smaller scale failures that kind of slip through the cracks and probably batches that don't pass quality check internally, before companies even put them out there. So, I would just caution anyone at this point from sort of making too many claims about comparing these two types of products, when there really isn't, kind of enough data available actually to make any strong claims about that one way or the other. But I think really that for me, the fact that you can bring it back and can get that testing should need be, and make it a waypoint that the product has to stop at before it goes to a regulated provisioning center, it makes it kind of irrelevant. As long as the tests are being done above board, you should be able to get safe product to the shelf. It doesn't really matter where it came from.
Right. Well, I mean, there is a provision for that in these bad bills, but it's dysfunctional. So if we're going to do what you're talking about, there's much better models to try to look at, but there's not really, support for that at the moment. It would be cool if we can move into that for sure, particularly after, successfully defending this. So I know that you can't make a complete with data that is from caregivers to the commercial market. But when you're talking about what was presented to the lawmakers, that's a bunch of, unreliable, non-specific kind of smoke and mirror presentation of information too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's tough I don't think anyone's got enough. Well, if they have this data, right, but I don't know that they've looked at it systematically either. So at that time that all the caregiver product was moved through Metric, in theory, all that data exists in Metric, right? And I mean, you could sit there and make comparisons to determine if product that was coming out of licensed facilities at that time was in any way, different than, say, caregiver product moving into provisioning centers.
Well, they have done that. And that's one of the things that's kind of scared the lawmakers. But I guess the point is,
but did they have access to sort of all of Metric? I mean, if they do it for their own data, that's okay, and says one thing. Unclear what they would choose to show and not show. I mean, there's just no control over that, right? So that's always a risk with presentation. That's why when we put our data out there, I'll present my data, but ideally I like to run it through a third party or multiple as much as possible, right? So a lot of the data I was discussing, for example, in that MLive article, that's been published recently in a peer-reviewed scientific journal article in the journal PLOS One. So, we run our data through additional checks to verify the accuracy. So it's not just us saying this is something we think or we've seen, but it's sort of past peer review and kind of has a different bar, right, that it meets.
Right. Well, even if somebody could look deep into the metric system and grab out as much information as they can about what came in as caregiver product, that doesn't mean that is indicative of product that comes from the regular caregiver system.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows what that exact product is. Not a lot of traceability at that time is what I'd say about it, right? So it's just trying to recreate kind of who was doing what or casting a specific group in a certain light based on that data is going to be tough. And, I think just saying it's a generalization, but we've seen a lot of caregiver product, of course, over the years, and obviously a lot of really high quality cannabis products coming through there. I don't think anyone would sort of argue that, the caregivers of Michigan were not doing their job to produce high quality product. We've shown that time and time again.
Let's explain to the viewers just real quick. In law, the requirements for the regulated market are very, very strict here in Michigan. But in law, the requirements for caregivers are zero. There's no quality requirement from the state for caregivers, which means caregivers can grow fantastic cannabis. And when they're achieving these type of levels, these type of regulated market levels, it's not because anyone's forcing them to or requiring them to. It's just because they're excellent caregivers. And if they were to happen to fall somewhere along in that middle of that scale, I mean, this is like Missouri standard. This is Ohio standard. This is, Oregon standard. They all have lesser standards in Michigan. So caregiver cannabis that doesn't quite meet our standard might very well pass in other states as perfectly safe.
Yeah, that is a known issue, right, that you just mentioned as far as there not being really a single set of standardized rules for what we deem safe cannabis from state to state. I mean, 100% that's still stands an issue. No, my thing is that doesn't mean just because two scientists disagree, that doesn't mean science isn't real. It just means that we may not have a firm grasp yet or the data to back up, kind of claims about what is healthy and unhealthy. And some states, I think, err on the side of a bit more caution. Others, maybe are a little looser. And this is going to be an ongoing, issue for a long time. But I agree with you that it's a challenge, and it'd be easier if we at least had sort of one set of rules, maybe federally or whatever, that we could look at to eliminate some of that variation noise that goes on there. But, all in all, I think that's still, you can look at the data that is out there and get some sense of what are the levels of mold that exist in cannabis, and maybe we need to go that direction, right? And kind of collect a lot more data and then start making laws that are more based on the data, as opposed to sort of setting up laws and then trying to cram data into that box that we've designated that may not be ultimately realistic in terms of, the mold content may not align with what we're saying is quality, right, in every case. And so that's the kind of stuff we need to continue to work on. So I fully agree with you that that's kind of a challenging, aspect of this in general, the whole system, that still needs additional data before we're going to kind of get there. So it's a great point.
I do want to point out one real quickly, though. It's in California, the state law is less restrictive than Berkeley, California, their city. They require higher, lower numbers, actually, in Berkeley, more stringent, which to me, that's the most bizarre aspect of it, that the state comes up with a plan and then these politically active locals, I don't know what you want to call people in Berkeley, but these political folks tightened it up even tighter.
The Berkeley standard, right? If you can meet the
ultimate weed snobs,
Right. And I mean, I would really like to know, and I don't know that Lev, you can answer this or would as a company, but I'd like to know, how much stuff runs through the lab that fails? 5%, 20%?
Yeah, I mean, it can vary, right? So like, you got to look at it globally like that. It probably is a fairly high percentage, on the order of 25%. Now, like we're talking just flour and stuff too. There's obviously these different complications, and something, failures for something like residual solvents. I look at that as that's just an incomplete process, right? That's not really a fail. That's kind of we need to put the pizza back in the oven or whatever. That's not really what I consider a failure. Now, like micro fails for flour, that's going to be the number one. It is challenging. There are heterogeneities. Labs have to do the best they can to come up with a valid sampling technique. It still may not capture everything perfectly. There are challenges with the system, right? That it's never going to be perfect, especially when you kind of have, the regulators aren't there to define exactly how the tests are done as much. And then that leaves a lot of room for labs to kind of try and make the cheapest tests available, right? Which may not be the most thorough one every time. And so there's a little bit of, just normal business stuff at work there where we all have to make decisions about how we're doing things to try and do the best we can to capture scientific accuracy, not cut corners on the validity of that test, but also make sure it's affordable to the people who have to pay for it. All those parts are, challenges that a lab owner and lab director has to balance when they're designing their tests. Now, that said, there's some grows that have very low fails, right? They have very good environmental control, and essentially that grow is throwing the average off as far as the fail rate. They're failing maybe 1 out of 10 batches, if that. They kind of dialed. And then there's other grows that have clearly gotten to a point where there's a lot going on, and we're just getting repeated failures because there's a global problem in their facility. The humidity and temperature swings are out of control, and as a result, any little bit of mold spores and vectors you have that are in there are just thriving, and so we'll kind of see facilities go through issues like that sometimes. But yeah, there's a decent amount that fails, and as you guys mentioned, some companies do remediate before it's even tested, and that's absolutely allowed in Michigan right now. There's very much sort of an honor system for disclosing remediation. So, that's an area where it's loosely tied to the labs and the failure. But I think it's more of just a consumer awareness issue. It's, a lab can't necessarily tell the difference, and it doesn't necessarily matter to us. We're just about, did it fail the test?
A lab, you can't tell if something's been remediated?
Not so much. I mean, you could guess, right? If it like just looks really beat up, or has, if it still has, say, mold hyphae in it, right? The mold's dead, but visually I can see that a lot of powdery mildew or mold exists in there. And powdery mildew is an example where it doesn't really grow in the mold tests that we run quantitatively. So you do have to only identify that one visually. It's the only real way to, sort of quantitate it, is to actually just sort of observe how much of it is present in the flower. Whereas a lot of the other molds, we're growing them in a culture technique and then actually counting, sort of how much colonies of particular microorganism formed from that amount of material.
How frequent is it for you to find powdery mildew in samples? Obviously dead powdery mildew from remediation, or what? How common is that?
Fairly common. I mean, that's an area where labs will have, kind of different standards for failure. It is one of the tests that's, it's more difficult to make it as quantitative across the board, say, compared to like a chemistry assay, right? There is more of a subjective observer analysis involved in it. Now they're counting, but it's of course not as precise as a well-calibrated HPLC, to new standards, all that kind of stuff. So there's kind of, each of these tests is a little different that way. Each lab is a little different that way. I mean, I think that's common in any testing industry, right? That you have labs that are a little more lax and friendlier. Our approach has always been, we're kind of like doctors for your product and personal trainers, coaches. So you don't want us to really be lax, because it's not just about, can I pass this one test, or, can I get this batch to the shelf and make my money back? I mean, that's great and everything, but if you want to be a company that's going to last for a long time and actually produce a quality product, our idea here is that you want to go to a trainer and a coach that's taking you seriously. I mean, if you were training for a marathon and your coach said, yeah, like, sure, smoke 3 packs of cigs a day, just eat whatever you want, probably. I don't think you need to practice, you'll be fine. That's not, to me, that's not the coach, that you want to seek out if you truly want to become a champion. You want to find someone who's going to actually say, hey, let me challenge a little bit, what your practices are, and make sure that they're as tight as they can be. And we'll prove that through actual data. So, I believe in the science and what it can do for a grow and sort of improve people's processes. And I know we've had a lot of caregivers and licensed facilities over the years who absolutely agree with that. And, that's why they use us for R&D when they want to know the real answer. And that's why they test with us for compliance, because they want to deliver accurate data to their patients as well.
What about 50% cannabinoids in a plant? We're seeing test results now being posted online. I'm just going to break the barrier. Let's just talk straight about it. Scientifically, anatomically, biologically, where are we at with this? It seems an extreme number that is not being reproduced in other states.
That's absolutely true. And that's where, where I tend to stick with is that, right? I'm a chemist by training. So a lot of what I do in my background is, understanding how to determine the concentration of chemicals, whatever they may be, in different materials. So I used to be a geologist. For the past, 7 years or so, I've been putting my efforts onto cannabis plants. So like you just said, reproducibility, transparency, collecting a large number of data points and looking at those are going to be the data that we need to collect to actually determine whether or not this is true. I'm not a plant biologist, and I'm not saying that there won't be a future where we can breed or potentially genetically modify, cannabis plants to produce higher levels of THC. We might have yeast or bacteria growing THC for edibles in the future, for all we know. But as of right now, in the data sets that we've analyzed. So about 8,000 or so flowers that I've tested in my day. I've never found any that get that high, on their own. It tops out at about 32% or so. That's sort of the tip of the top. I've seen some flowers get there, but it's by nature very rare. Anything over 30% in my lab, you're talking the 99.7th percentile plus. So that means 3 out of every 1,000 flowers I've ever measured have been over 30 weight percent THC.
If one of your lab techs came to you with this paper in their hand and said, "Look, it's 50%,"
yeah,
what would your response be?
Well, we have a lot of processes in place already. It mentioned in there that MRA audits flowers over a certain percentage, right? We have that internally as a process that we already had in place before MRA started, or CRA now, asking us questions. So of course I'm not like, "Hey, call Guinness, guys. We got another record breaker. Let's fucking do this." Like, I'm like, no, let's go back. We need to check what happened there. I think something went wrong, guys. Did we start at the beginning? So we look, is the raw data correct? Did we even put the correct data into the right place, or did somehow something get swapped there? And you just keep going back from there, rechecking, reprocessing until you get confident that data is reproducible. So if you truly can't find an error and see that you spit out a 40% or whatever, go take another subsample, try that again, run another dilution, get a few data points to verify. So if we're going to put out anything that's sort of extraordinary in that way, in my lab, you can be assured that we've put that through enough testing to be confident that we're putting that out. So, I mean, yeah, it's, and I'm always happy to walk people through our process. To me, it's not a trick, there's no secret to how we do it. We don't do it. We don't have a trick for pulling more cannabinoids out than other labs. We just try and produce accurate data, and I'm happy to sort of run people through that process to see how did I get that. So, one thing I do in my lab is I take THCA diamonds. They're pretty common now. That's going to be your main analyte that you're measuring in a flower, right? So if you get a really potent flower, primarily what you measured was the THCA concentration, right? Because it's very small amount of decarb at that point. So I'll run some diamonds that, caregivers bring through. They bring some really great secondarily recrystallized diamonds of extremely high purity. Some licensed producers are making fantastic ones as well. And if you run the THCA through your whole process using the same scales, the same volumetrics, and you get, a nonsense answer like 120%, 130%, that should tell you something about there's an error in your process, right? So anytime if we had that, we're looking to immediately get rid of that, figure out what caused it, not do it again, and let anybody know who may have gotten a spurious result because of that isn't real, before they go ahead and call Guinness and kind of start, waving the flag about how great it is, because obviously it's a little bit hard to believe.
I'm sorry, Brett, go ahead. Rick.
No, Anton, I've asked plenty of questions. You go ahead, man.
My whole thing when it comes down to this whole science thing and what we're doing with the labs, like Jamie brought up the word industry standard, and I'm viewing that as an oxymoron right now because it doesn't appear to exist as a consumer. I kind of represent the consumer perspective. And, one thing about data and facts, especially in today's world, is it's kind of, they could be skewed either way. For every 10 doctors I can find for one thing, I can find 10 that'll say the opposite, right? And it seems like a lot of the processes that we have, just because you have a process and you can replicate that process doesn't mean that process is not bullshit. You know what I mean? And I think, I don't know if this is a regulatory issue, because on one hand, we have labs who are saying we are creating these results. These are accurate results per our process that is approved by the state. Then we have licensees who are taking these products with numbers that don't, I believe in Santa Claus before I believe in some of the numbers that we're seeing. Okay. Right. And then they're taking that product and they're saying, well, we've obtained this from a licensed lab. These results were verified per state standards. Exactly, Adam. I like it. Right. And then they are then passing this on to the consumers. And it's the consumer who's getting fucked at the end of the day, because when I go into a Walgreens and I buy Tylenol, 500 milligrams, I expect there to be 500 milligrams, not 200 milligrams, right? And just because, some lab is saying, no, our process says this is one thing, what is the deal here? Because is it the lab who's showing smaller results that's fucked up? Is it the lab? Is it the licensees who are fucked up for taking these products in and willingly passing these products on, knowing that's real science doesn't support this shit, right? And then when you have questions about the process, it's proprietary, right? And we've verified these results through all these other labs, but we're not going to show you the results. There's no faith from a consumer standpoint. What is it? What is the crux here? How do we fix this?
No, I totally agree with almost everything you just said there. Now, in terms of, let me approach this a couple different ways. So, yeah, I mentioned something in that article that I call the cycle of potency inflation. You just hit on many different hubs of that wheel, right? Which is there's consumers who are like willingly fucking themselves here because we want to believe the hype, and that's a problem. And then you got shop owners who are like, well, I got to sell weed and everyone's coming in asking for super high potency. And they're, rather than educating or kind of trying to take the harder road, they're just compliant with that, and saying, well, I got to find potent weed. And then the grower says, well, no one's going to buy my weed unless it's crazy potent. And so then they kind of turn to the lab, and then it's up to the lab to, say, okay, now I have to, essentially either put out accurate data and maybe suffer the consequences of that for my clients, or, create results that are desirable from my clients. And yeah, then where's the regulators there, right? Shouldn't it be their job to sort of actually say, yeah, you have to use a method that's approved, not just kind of a free-for-all on science? I mean, what we have now is the equivalent of if there was no department of weights and measures, right? And like each individual gas pump run by each individual gas station was its own, could have its own claim to accuracy, and there could be people who come around and are like, yeah, I calibrated that pump, whatever, and it's spitting out, 0.8 gallons per gallon compared to a different pump that some other guy calibrated. And so until you have a state department that's able to come in with their own measuring device, and sort of say, nah, this guy's actually, been through the program that follows our procedure, and this is the number they get. Now, how you decide who's accurate when it comes down to these, it's easy to make claims about everything. I get that. I think that is true. The value of scientific truth has certainly gone down, in modern times. And I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of just whoever can tell the best story, people kind of buy into that. I'm a scientist. I'm a chemist. I believe in the scientific method. I believe in doing something over and over again and getting the same result is how you determine whether or not that works. We've done many things as humans throughout our history that are based on that exact principle. And I don't think it's just pure chance that, many of them have kind of worked out.
No, but that brings up an important point, is that the process itself does have some subjective portions to it, right? I mean, there are some times when you're out there sampling, when you're supposed to be taking random samples from different parts within a batch itself, you can either randomly select different things, or you can select things that look exceptionally delicious, let's just call it, in order to elevate your sample itself. When you're talking about the subjectiveness of analyzing a bacteria, it's just counting, you said. And I know what you're referring to, because you have grids and you count exactly the numbers that you have in each individual grid, and then you plug that in and see if whether or not it passes. And that subjective thing could be manipulated as well. So there are ways in which a lab who wanted to give favorable results to their client would be able to put 100%. Their finger on the scale. Isn't that correct, though?
Yeah, there's a million ways. I mean, and in fact, it's just, there is a lot of ethics and honor system involved in all this stuff. And then there are tests and blind tests that we have to do and oversight that we have to go through as a lab that helps ensure that we're doing the best we can to meet those requirements. But absolutely, it's like any license, like a driver's license. I mean, you're not going to be doing donuts in the parking lot on the day you're at the driver's facility trying to pass your test. But there's no guarantee that when you leave, you would actually follow those rules. So that's the problem that I think is out there, is that you really have to, you can't watch everybody all the time. So there are, of course, opportunities. Now, my thing about how do you know what's accurate, though, is look at the big data set. So this paper that was just published, we contributed data, but all we did was contribute data to someone who was looking to compile this data. All this person did was vet 6 different labs in 6 different markets by looking at their actual data, comparing that data to known scientific literature from academic institutions that had no skin in the game in terms of selling weed, right? And how potent weed is. They were just looking at it simply for academic purposes. These guys are sitting here looking through all our data. They're just looking at the data from a statistical standpoint to see, are there anomalies in this data set that just don't stand with like a normal data set? If you just take a normal data set spread from a natural product and look at a parameter, it's going to follow a normal distribution. It'll be a bell curve, right? With a average and then a spread to either side of that varies with how much variance there is within that population. And when you look at almost 100,000 data points from 6 different labs in 6 different states, each running different methods, none of us talk to each other about what our method is, right? So, you mentioned all of these different little subjective parts. Well, we're kind of incorporating all that, just looking at the end result of 90,000 to 100,000 data points. And in there, you can see that average potency for cannabis flower in these regulated markets is about 18%. Very few of them are over 30%, a literal fraction of a percent of that population. And it's pretty revealing, So I think, to me, you can sit there and have these discussions, but as we start to establish this data, get peer-reviewed scientific data out there, that's when, it sort of doesn't stand up as well. If one lab claims, we test way higher than everyone because we're better at extracting cannabinoids somehow, even though 100,000 data points from 6 other labs that were actually vetted and then published in a peer-reviewed paper never see, well, that, you have to be dubious of claims like that, of course.
You would think that as this progresses, as the industry, as the science progresses, you would think that the consumers would have more faith in what's going on. And I think what you're finding now is the opposite. I mean, can you imagine if our forensic labs operated like this? And these are folks who deal with, well, I mean, to the extent,
how the fuckers got a lab?
The guys at Lowell and Veritas,
right.
Skewed science then too.
But I mean, if we had, DNA and a lot of these other things that are passing the Fry standard in court that have been tested and have, have been testified to. I mean, it doesn't make sense that we have one area of science that's so nailed down. And I mean, I don't know what the answer is. It's becoming frustrating, to be honest with you.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think somewhere this cycle has to break. It's not going to be one place. I think multiple groups involved in this have to embrace changes in behavior and realize that what you said before that really I agree with and hits home with me more than anything is that it's the consumer who's paying the price, and that's what bugs me the most, because really why I got into this is because I love good cannabis and I think everyone deserves access to that. And I think that, ultimately done correctly, that's what this system is designed for, is to put better, higher quality cannabis in everyone's hands. And so when that isn't happening and it's sort of being used as a cover to do the opposite of that, I think it's highly problematic.
There are misinformed sick people who are depending on this, and they're going in based upon believing that they're receiving one thing and depending that this is going to better their health, and they're not getting that thing. And that's the biggest travesty of this whole thing, I believe.
So we're going to have to move on here pretty soon. We're going to talk about, and by the way, Lev, you are welcome to hang out and be part of the discussion as long as you want to. And we're going to get into the Michael Thompson stuff. But, since the end of the emergency 19 rule where caregivers were allowed to bring their products to market, and then as we discussed, there are some issues with viewing that as representative of the regular caregiver system. But since that time, your lab has worked with caregivers who want to know about some certain things, and no, they don't have the same exact mandates. They don't have to do the same stuff as the thing, but you do, and that's where where you don't really have the apples to apples kind of thing, but you do have an idea of like, are they generally, is there pesticides in it, real safety, type issues. Sometimes they do get more full panels. You can see that they have these outrageous levels of, molds and stuff. Are there reasons to believe that it's particularly dangerous, or, things like that? There is some information like that I think that's usable, even though I agree with you, since they're not getting the exact same thing. In some cases they are, if they choose to, for the purposes of seeing if their whole process is, use a strain, for example, as an example to see if their process is doing well with microbials or whatever. And you have some of that kind of information. And that to me is, even though it's not exactly the same, it's a lot more telling about what goes on in the regular caregiver system than information that was derived from when caregivers could bring their medicine.
Yeah, I think you may be seeing more just sort of the caregivers right now who grow for their patients, and now that they can't move product into the market. So this may be, that era sort of after that phase may be more representative of kind of what the typical caregiver is bringing to market. And we do actually have, slightly cheaper pricing when we're not doing the sampling. You're just bringing it to us over the counter. There's a lower cost to us when we don't actually have to go on the road and sample, because as you mentioned before, that is a part of the system, right? And when the test actually starts, is getting that accurate, is getting a representative sample from the beginning, and then handling that in a way that's maintaining it being a representative sample in the laboratory all the way till the end when you produce that data. So absolutely, if you take a biased sample, you can get a biased result. I think there's maybe a little overemphasis on how much that affects the potency, though, out there. There's a bit of a, I think kind of a myth of how much you can increase the potency of something by adding back keef, say, that falls out during trimming. I don't know enough about yields of actual keef that falls out, but I know that when you're attempting to harvest keef, say in the process of making bubble hash, it's not like the yields are relatively low. This is not, you can't just shake a bud and get like 50% of the weight of a pound comes out in keef. So when you start to do the math on it, right, and that keef, even really good keef, the maximum potency is maybe 50% THC, which is funny since we're talking about, flowers that might have close to that. But really in all the good keef we've ever measured, it's, running 50, maybe a few points higher than that total THC. Even if you had 10% keef, that sort of fell off of your pound, and the bud itself was left at 20%, you threw all that back into a pound, you're going to move that needle a couple points. There's mass balance stuff.
And that's a number that gets way too much emphasis, as you brought up earlier.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So I just want to let Joe know that, yes, you do test caregiver medicine. And that was my point. Even though it's not the exact same thing, you can still tell, that there's not pesticides in it, that it doesn't demonstrate itself to be particularly dangerous, that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. We see a lot of great caregiver work, tons.
Right. Hey, sir, can you tell people about PSI a little bit, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. So we're one of the first licensed laboratories in the state for medical. We are the first license for adult use. Been around since 2015 in Ann Arbor. We're at our second location right now. We started before licensing, so we've been servicing the industry even during the kind of more gray market times. tested for a lot of hash bash cups for Adam, cannabis cups for High Times back when they used to do those up in Clio. And yeah, we're available for caregivers, adults who just hobby growers, as well as licensed growers in the regulated market. And founded with my partner, Ben Rossman, who's an attorney. So he's the business side of the business, and I'm the science side. I'm a Ph.D. chemist. My background's in geochemistry, a lot of emphasis on heavy metals and isotopes. That's the kind of stuff I used to study in meteorites and, like environmental samples, ancient sea sediments. And yeah, for the last 7 years at PSI Labs here, we've been turning our science chops onto cannabis and helping bring people better quality cannabis in this state.
Right on, man. I appreciate it. We'll have you back on because there's more to talk about. It's a very interesting conversation. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you.
And again, if you want to hang out, be part of the discussion, and chill out with us, you are more than welcome.
I appreciate it. I got to get out of here, though, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate
it. Take care.
Thanks
Thank
a lot,
you.
man.
Thanks for your contributions today.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
A lot of really insightful things were said today, and that it helps clarify the situation. Hopefully we can take some of these quotes and translate them into a way for the legislators to see and actually maybe defeat some of the negative images that's being cast about caregivers out there.
Right on. Hey, so Marshall Clabeaux, Mike McCurdy, many other things too that are helpful, specifically with cannabis, like with the Cannabis Caucus and Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition. But two of the guys operating the Michael Thompson Clemency Project and working with Michael Thompson and others to get more people out of jail. And welcome, you guys.
Oh, thanks for inviting us on the show, Jamie. It's good to see you guys.
Yeah, well, fellas, thanks for having us.
And we got to see the movie, the sentencing of Michael Thompson. Is that right?
The Sentence
of Michael Thompson. And very moving, man. I'm really happy I made it out there for that. The Capitol Theater in Flint. And I was definitely affected. And of course, some of the discussions surrounding it, including talking about the other people that are still behind bars and for decades, and all the kind of abuse, and the family members being there, stuff like that. That was just really intense and just pretty powerful. I mean, obviously very very profound. Some of that work. The movie helps us really point that out. How intensely affected the family is, and all that kind of stuff. But tell us about the movie. What's generally going on with it? I know it's been touring around and stuff, and has been making appearances and using it as a way to let people know about.
Yeah, sure. Thank you guys both, Rick and Jamie, for coming out to our event. That was the first screening in Flint, so Michael Thompson's hometown. So brought out a lot of his family supporters, and then also, as you mentioned, family and supporters of the 12 different incarcerated individuals who we are trying to get out on clemency right now. We're filing clemencies and trying to get Whitmer to sign for their freedom. So the first time we had all those people together, and so that was powerful for us.
Yeah,
so some of the people that you listed out, and of course, with the Michael Thompson Clemency Project, you're not limited to just cannabis crimes. You're helping people for a variety of different crimes. Some of them had ridiculously long sentences they'd served. Mike, can you talk about some of those incredibly, terribly long sentences people have already served in prison?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's terrible. Like, one of the cases we talk about is Mark Perrin. Mark Perrin has already served nearly 4 decades, and he's in crime. He participated. He made a mistake. He participated in armed robbery, but somebody he was with, he never knew it was going to happen. They killed somebody, and it was tragic. But Mark was 18. He was 18. He had mental health problems. They talked about it in court. He had mental health problems. Had a tough childhood. He made a big mistake when he was 18. 40 years later, it's like what Michael Thompson likes to say is, when is enough enough? You know, he hasn't been a threat to society for many, many, many years. He's not of a criminal mindset. He's a good man. He just wants a chance to, you know, sort of live his elder years, you know, in society and a chance to give back. So that's just one example of many. You know, we've got, you know, really we're looking at some of these cases. We have one man who's been down. I forget the exact number of years. It's over 5 decades, and it's literally he spent 2 years of his adult life free as a black man, free from segregation. He lived under segregation a few years, 2 years after legal segregation ended, and then was imprisoned. It has been in prison ever since. You know, you look at what kind of opportunities did a lot of these people really have, and it's time for some mercy. You know, it's time to say, are these people a threat to society? You know, clearly they're not. Michael Thompson knows they're not. He spent, you know, decades, you know, inside with them. He knows them personally. They're his family. He knows they're not a threat to society, and that's why one of the reasons it's so powerful for him to tell Gretchen Whitmer, hey, you knew, you gave me a chance. It's time for you to give some of these other guys a chance too. I'm not the only one.
Right. Marshall, you were there too. I mean, you had a lot to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you know, Mike and I are co-directors, you know, so really honored to work side by side, you know, with Miko, you know, leading the charge, saying, you know, enough is enough. You know, justice delayed is justice denied. We do have, you know, cannabis. It appears everywhere in the court system. You know, it's these they stack charges, and many first charge anyone had was cannabis, and even Corey McCullough, who's been down 17 years, 66 to 99-year sentence. He was a delivery driver for a cannabis deal gone bad. Stayed outside. There was someone murdered inside, and they threw it at him. And so he's like a little brother to Miko, son, and Corey. You know, his family was there. It was just very powerful to have all the families there at once. You know, Mike and I, we're going to these families' houses, you know, across the state, wherever there be, and I can say at least both of us, you know, our cars, our bedrooms, wherever we live, we have piles of prison papers, and like it's not, you know, the act of digitizing, you know, paper records is not that difficult, but it's never been done for these guys, so no one has ever seen what's going on, and it's a huge process. But you know, we're getting very close to filing clemency for all our guys. You know, one of them is deceased, unfortunately. Spent 40 years behind bars for a fist fight. Robert Canyon was his name, and you know, he helped put on a dinner in honor of George Floyd. That was one of the stories shared in the program that Sarah Gerstein of Last Prisoner Project wrote. Michael Thompson helped organize inside, and organized, it was like 90 to 100 guys in solidarity, you know, for George Floyd. It was a really, really powerful story, so definitely look that up if you haven't heard it.
So Last Prisoner Project, very, very involved in Michael getting out and in publicizing some of his causes since. The film itself is about 25 minutes long, and it was a perfect Father's Day viewing because it's really the story of his daughters trying to seek dad's freedom. Isn't that correct?
That's right. It tells the story of you know, how his daughter, and also an entire nationwide movement, is what it really took. People fighting for Michael Thompson to get his freedom. You know, and it's a little bit daunting, you know, to see that, wow, even with a case where, you know, Rick Thompson, you yourself helped get the Attorney General to write a letter about the case. It was so... The case was so egregious that even the Attorney General took umbrage and wrote directly to the governor to say, this is outrageous. How can a man have been in prison for this long on cannabis charges? And so what's scary is the fact that there are many more Michael Thompsons. You know, we all know Rudy Gamble, for example, who's, you know, been in for several years now. I didn't know this, actually. I was preparing for the event, and where I was going to be saying a few words about Rudy. And I looked up what his latest release date was, and I believe it was either 2046 or 2056, believe it or not. You know, he will almost certainly get out sooner, but they don't have to let him go. They can hold him for that long, and that's terrifying. You know, and they have so many of these guys in there. There's so many Michael Thompsons, and there's no way that there's enough time or money in the world to have the movement behind each one of these individuals that Michael Thompson had. You know, not everybody's going to have celebrities speaking out for him, you know, money getting thrown at him, tens of thousands of letters from around the country getting written for them. You know, just here in Michigan alone, we have over 30,000 people locked up. So just logistically, that's impossible. So, you know, we have some major reforms that need to happen. And honestly, Governor Whitmer has been doing some good work, but we're really hoping that she's going to continue to sign more clemencies and get some more of these people out.
Now, this film has toured across the United States. It was at South by Southwest. There was a San Francisco Film Festival, and it is Oscar eligible because it has won some awards. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the film itself and how successful it's been?
Yeah, it's really won awards everywhere it's gone. Actually, Mike's hopping on a jet plane heading to California with Michael Thompson tomorrow to Palm Springs. And so, you know, it's Palm Springs on circuit, and then we got Indianapolis, I believe Atlanta, and I believe New York are all, you know, in the hopper. And it's been since the first, it was kind of the Santa Barbara Film Festival that won an award just for the cover art, and so that was like the first award. And then every award festival since, it's kind of taken home a shorts documentary award, a shorts being a specific type of documentary that's a certain length. And so it's exciting work, and you know, Michael is eager to tell the story of prison reform. You know, that's why he's traveling. That's why you know, it's not easy traveling that much, especially post hip surgery, post knee surgery, post, you know, just got his freedom. And so, you know, he's grinding, but he's getting the work done, and it's good to see success follow.
You know, a part of the film centers around Michael's actual release from prison, and several of us were there on that snowy morning in the cold, where they scheduled it so early to try and screw with us, but yet still there was a dozen cameras from national media sources there, and a whole bunch of us. That was such an emotional moment. Every time I see that in the film, I was fortunate enough, along with the other guys, to see this film previously at a private showing at Michael's house. So I'd already seen the scenes, but it still got to me anyway, right? Watching that time when he walked out, when the guards, you know, stopped holding his arms and just let him walk free.
Oh, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And I still to this day, it's so hard to believe that a man could lose 25 years of his life, come out into the freezing cold, and within less than 5 minutes be in front of news cameras doing a press conference, calling out the injustice of the prison system, calling out the abuse of the system, and talking about the guys he was leaving behind who didn't belong there, who in his words were getting treated like dogs. So I mean, what a powerful way to come out and say, you haven't broken me, and you know, I cannot be broken.
Yeah, I cannot be broken. His strength is inspiring. I mean, just it's powerful.
That's one of the value of having a film like this that centers around his story. Not only is it inspirational to other people who may be facing the same challenge of having a loved one incarcerated, but it reminds people of the consequences of the drug war, right? When you look at what happened to Michael Thompson, you think excessive, racist treatment of a man who was a nonviolent individual and whom prosecutors twisted around a firearms scenario in order to paint him in a way that he wasn't, to secure a hugely long sentence. Plus, as is discussed in the film, there was already a plea agreement in place that the judge threw out that would have been a much more friendly, much more reasonable punishment for whatever crime they claimed he had. And the judge absolutely refused to do that. And he ended up with a sentence of 46 to 60 years.
Yeah, it really is interesting, the interplay of guns and how they use the interplay of guns and drugs to continuously lock people up. And, you know, the truth is it's the drug war that is causing the majority of the gun violence in our nation. It's driving a multi-billion-dollar business into the streets where no legal law enforcement can protect the business. So of course there's going to be armed gangs. There's no other way. The drug war necessitates that there's armed gangs and armed conflict in our streets.
Right. So systemic change is what we're talking about here, and the Michael Thompson Clemency Project has more than just an individual advocacy organization. Michael also talks about trying to fix things like food service and psychiatric services for incarcerated persons. And those are issues that go beyond a single person's case and talk about the nature of how we jail and punish people in the state of Michigan. And really, those are systems that are woefully inadequate. Certainly, he caught COVID inside and, didn't want to reveal it to anybody for a lot of different reasons. But
oh, yeah. I can see that.
Can't drink the water, and you can't. I mean, I'm talking, man. We talked to these guys. Michael, the moment he walked out, he said he hears the voices, and the voices are real. And Henry Henn said he has vision problems, and he can't drink the water, and it clouds his vision, and they can't get the surgery on his eyes, and so he goes blind. But then they have to drink bottled water, and you don't always get access to it, and so it's just Michael talks about washing his clothes in the toilet stool. It's just,
yep.
You have to talk to the person next door and flush at the same time, so their shit doesn't pop up in your sink, and so it's just horrifying, the conditions. And so Michael talks about this, talks about the felony firearms, talks about stacking the charges, about the policy reform, and that's where the lawmakers need to start listening too. This is bipartisan. This is not a Democrat issue, not a Republican issue. It's really a human rights issue. So hopefully. Michael can keep getting in front of policymakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And another piece of his story that really shines light on prison abuse is he was in desperate need of both hip replacement and knee surgery for many, many, many years in massive amounts of pain. And he would have never gotten that surgery in prison. They weren't ever going to give it to him. And that's elder abuse, right? I mean, that's an abuse no matter how old the person. But in Michael Thompson's case, that's elder abuse. And thankfully, his good friend Bob Dodge, he got him right into the doctor and got him his surgeries, as soon as possible upon release. And he's in much less pain now, and he's getting his walk back. Hopefully soon he'll be able to hang up that cane, But again, I mean, imagine we don't want to, but if they hadn't, if Governor Whitmer had not used the power of the pen, if we hadn't had a nationwide movement, if we hadn't gotten the Attorney General, he'd still be behind bars, and he would still be suffering in pain every day.
It's rough to think that all of that went into to get one guy out, when that he has a pretty rough situation. But there are many others, as we're discussing here today, for minimal minor cannabis stuff, or these excessive sentences.
Now, we talked previously about a listing that we have, Marshall Corson and Mike, members of the Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition, and many other efforts. Originally, there was a list of several hundred, 700 people that they had given us as a result of our FOIA request, which was melded down to a hot list. And didn't we just hear recently that most of the people, or more than half of the people on that, what we call like a hot list, have actually received some help? Marshall, is that what I remember hearing?
Yeah, that's it's all about right. So the Attorney General's office did give us a list of 1,200, but it was a mixed bag list. It had some really heinous crimes in there. They never really have accounted for that, but it got down to about 100 people, 300 with cannabis, as a primary charge. And the latest update from the governor's office is that over half of those, I think that they ended up taking on like 76 a look at, and like 40 of them have already have gotten some sort of help reentry. So, and that's due to the efforts, of the cannabis community that has helped fund the Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition, and really as a national coalition. It's really a movement to get cannabis prisoners out and have a just industry.
That's fantastic. I mean, when we talk about making a real impact in people's lives, helping 40, 50, 60 people get the attention of the government that actually would not really want to pay attention to them in the first place. who actually probably refused several times to pay attention to them in the past. That's the power of activism and the continuing need for us to keep it going.
Yeah, and the cannabis community, in my mind, is really, we understand the injustice of the prison system. Those of us who've been utilizing marijuana for decades, most of us probably before we were adults. We've seen people go down. We've seen people lose their kids. We've seen just the injustice of how it works, how cold-hearted and how really brutal the system is, and we just have to keep learning ourselves and educating others that it's not just our community that gets targeted. That it is really a brutal system that targets people across the nation, and immigrants as well.
Yeah, we got a guy on this panel that's experienced that firsthand for sure.
Yeah, I did 2 years in Parnell on a gun charge, which
Related
started
to
out
cannabis.
as a cannabis raid. They didn't find what they were looking for because I wasn't doing what they thought I was, and they found some guns, and I was a felon. And 21 charges later, Oakland County decided that a 2-year flat sentence they'd be happy with that. So, and I'll tell you, I saw some crazy shit happen there, and I had friends in prison who had been there 20, 30 years, and they were telling me how things used to be, how the meals used to be so much better, how the recreation was so much better, how, all that as horrible as a place it was, they still had better quality a lifestyle than what we were having. I just was shocked by the whole thing. It was more shocking than it was anything else. And I was in a level 1 the whole time. So I didn't, I'm not saying that I was seeing the real crazy stuff, but basically our prisons have become mental health. And, they lock up a bunch of low-level people because they did crazy stuff in the world.
Michael tells some stories like that too, about some people who are pretty deranged and that he had experiences with and inside. The fact is, we all know this to be true. Sometimes prison takes a good man who made a single mistake and turns him into something lesser.
Oh yeah.
But the important thing that we have to remember, though, is that no one should be in jail for a plant. We've changed the rules. We have to change that attitude. We have to give people another shot. And even, the Clemency Project for Michael Thompson goes beyond just cannabis crimes itself and looks at people whose sentences are just ridiculously unjust. Mike, there were several times I heard you mention people that had been in jail for 50 years for crimes. 56, I remember, 52 maybe, I think. Wow.
What kind of threat?
William Hunt, 56 years. And it's kind of copy, paste, repeat. Wrong place, wrong time. Honestly, it was usually a family member and no one wanted to throw the book on. So some people took plea deals that were there, and these guys are just sitting in incarceration. 43 years, 45 years, 56. Henry Hens, 43. Donald Williams, 45. It's tragic. And these guys can help. They want to help. They want to be a voice in the community to stop the same pattern, stop the young guys coming in. They know it better than any of us than how to stop violence in the streets. So if the government is serious about reducing violence, they need to learn from the elders. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole pool of mentors that can potentially help steer some young people away from where they're headed. Miko himself, on stage in front of the entire crowd at the Capitol Theater, urged the youngsters to put the guns down and stop killing each other. And that kind of leadership, he did it before, right? He led a gang walk. He led in the city of Flint, received the key to the city because he helped end gang violence between some very seriously rival groups. That's pretty amazing stuff. You don't keep a guy like that locked up. You give him all the money he needs in order to recreate that everywhere he could possibly go, right? That's what you would do if he was white.
Well, that's what you would like to think, right, Rick? But the truth is is, the way Miko tells the story, that's actually was the beginning of the end for him. It's really why they locked him up. He did that walk and it raised his profile, and the police didn't like it. They didn't like it, and they started basically hunting him. They started investigating him and putting people, basically, the first, they sold to his friend. They busted his friend, and they got his friend to wear a wire and set him up. It's the standard thing. But he was targeted. He was targeted because of his peace and justice work, because of his political work. He really was, at the end of the day, not just a cannabis prisoner, but a political prisoner.
A prosecutor at that particular time probably needed a win, and it's in all of the different ways that we can measure progress, that we can see that we've advanced. In some ways, we're still so much, just like that time. And I know exactly where he was pulled over. I heard him tell the story himself. I know exactly where he had to slide his car over, and the cops got him right there at Robert T. Longway and Dort Highway. And when I pass by that intersection every time, I think about him. And sometimes I see people pulled over, and I wonder.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah. But
yeah, it's always a concern when somebody's in that situation. You never know what happens, what could be going on,
or who the person is, what kind of a Ph.D. candidate just happens to be driving with a cracked windshield,
Yep.
That's right. Or these days, we got to worry about getting tested for cannabis, and we're all going to have it in our system, so there's that whole end of things. It's just a dangerous world.
25-year-old Terry Burkhead, cannabis charge in level 5 prison in Braga in the UP for, I don't know. We can't figure it out. We're trying to get him out. He's completed all his classes, and
how's he in a level 5?
We don't know. It's crazy.
But it must have been something that happened after he got inside that got him the level 5 designation.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he may have put in someone's name on something and said, I can't be near them. Who knows? But level 5, his only charge is cannabis?
He has cannabis, and that's his only active. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. That's got to be more protective custody than anything.
wow. I mean, that's
I'm
a
just
hard
shocked by. I was in the joint with a guy that was sold a $10 dime bag violation. They put him in for 3 years, got out, sold another 10. They put him back in for 3 years. I mean, and he was on his third set of 3 years. Almost 10 years he was there. And for $10 worth of weed.
This guy, Terry, says it was a gram of weed. I swear.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
What we saw with Michael Thompson is one of the things that made a big difference in his case was the involvement of some national celebrities. And he credited Montel Williams and Sean King and some of the other people, Kim Kardashian he mentioned, who had helped champion his cause and bring some attention to it. That's the kind of case we need to. How long's he been down, Marshall? He's in a level 5, but how long?
He's been 3 years on this cannabis charge. So
For 1 gram, 3 years.
it was after legalization too. It was after 2018. So it's just.
I don't even know how that happened.
It's unreal. It doesn't seem real, but
Was
it's
there
real.
did he try to sell it or something?
Yeah, it was. He was out on like a bond situation, and some undercover cop crashed or something.
Just stupid.
Because they could have pulled an excessive response to remuneration.
That's just crazy, man.
That almost happened in Detroit. Our MCFC got into that one case out of Wayne County if you got a couple of years ago.
That's right. That was I was chairing the Cannabis Caucus at the time, and we got contacted by a defense attorney in Detroit, which is just unheard of and really bizarre to think about. Defense attorney, pro bono, provided by the state. So somebody who's barely getting paid, basically. And she's like, oh my God, my client's facing 20 to 40 years for selling, $40 worth of weed. How is this possible? I don't know what to do. I'm going to call these random activists and see if they can help. And the scary thing is I think we did, honestly. I think we put some pressure on the Attorney General's office. We filed some FOIA requests. Not the Attorney General's office, I'm sorry, the Wayne County prosecutor's office. And they denied all our FOIAs, but they also dropped the charges in that case. But the fact that there was that one case, that was brought to us makes me believe there's a lot more, and especially the fact that they refused to answer our FOIAs. It's terrifying. I really believe that in Wayne County in particular, if not elsewhere, they are still have the old cannabis laws in full effect, right? Because
some of these out counties like Kent and places like that have been known to do some hanky stuff too.
Look, you can change the laws, but you can't automatically change people's mindset.
Right.
And those people that wear badges and are sheriffs and they're not going to change their programming from 40 years of being anti-cannabis just because some liberal Democratic people went ahead and passed a stupid ballot proposal. They don't have to change nothing in their damn town. We see this all over the place. People still victimized. I-75, the corridor of death, right there where that state police post is by Gaylord. Terrible, terrible. Jamie knows.
Well,
Well, also we have to remember that if I roll up a joint right now and walk out in front of my house and sell it to somebody for $5 on the sidewalk, it's the old laws. The old laws kick in because I have not followed the rules of the new laws, and we got to get rid of those old laws. We got to get them. We got to deschedule. You guys know this. Because there I am. I've violated. I've sold drugs. The consequences can be extreme.
Yep, House Bill 5587. I think that's right. Does that sound right?
It does.
Would do that, and of course, it's one of a handful, or at least three good bills that don't have any momentum or support behind them. Whereas we're about ready to watch a bill pass that would destroy the immunity that medical marijuana users have, and just allow judges to discriminate against them for volunteer courts.
Yeah. But again, there's no
right.
logic to the drug war, and there's no logic to the way that the legislature looks at these things too. They're all influenced by special interest groups who are well funded and have entrenched lobbyists who have been doing this for years. So the legislature just gets led by the nose based on the people that get there to talk to them. And sometimes we get a chance to make a difference, and sometimes they're already too far sold for us to have logic penetrate their sticks.
That was definitely the case there. I will say it's like the cannabis law section of the state bar, I know as an entity, doesn't appreciate not being involved on that discussion, and they don't like this bill. Had there been some action maybe a little earlier, I don't know. There's all these different. Plus, there was there was the question of the MICIA's support or not support or neutral or whatever too, and that got a little misguided. And it's been a tough one, and it's been against some formidable challenges. But there are times, like when people are trying to change the act, that they do have a lot of support, and they have gotten to a lot of people. But we only need that smaller number of people because of the need to get the supermajority, the 75% vote. And we have been able to stave some stuff off that way. So our efforts still very, very good, but man, there are some tough challenges out there.
Well, and one of the ways that the Michael Thompson Clemency Project has been successful is by networking with other agencies and other groups, similar to the way that we network with other groups when we approach the legislature. Y'all have worked with Last Prisoner Project and the Cannabis Caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party. So many other groups on a national level too. Cresco's been specifically supportive of your organization, and also I believe financed the film that we just watched, right?
That's right. Cresco Labs, very supportive. They have actually provided funding that allows us, Marshall and I to each work 15 hours a week, for the compensated for the project, which is, which is important because the truth is we were doing it for a long time for nothing, and that's not sustainable. You're just we're answering the phones all the time, doing the paperwork all the time, and it starts to eat away from your, whatever other way you're trying to make a living. So thank you, Cresco, really for real, making it possible. They funded the film. They give other support to Miko. So they've really put their money where their mouth is and been broadly supportive of our efforts to not only get Michael Thompson's message out, but help gain freedom for some of these individuals.
Yeah, shout out Cresco. They've been our primary supporter financially, and they helped set up a partnership with Khalifa Kush, which is coming to Michigan the 25th, next Saturday. They got a partnership with Gage about to unveil, so it makes a difference. Like Mike said, the phone rings all hours of the day. When you can connect with prisoners is, usually inconvenient. I was at a family Christmas party, but I answered the call because you just don't want to miss it. You don't know when you're going to be able to connect again. So
there were so many families of people who are incarcerated there at the premiere at the Capitol Theater. I know you guys are the ones that organized that, and that must have been quite a challenge too.
It honestly, it felt like such an honor to be the go-between between. So basically, we were able to, we call them our constituents, the incarcerated individuals we work with. We were able to go to each constituent and say, who would you like to invite to this event? We're doing this red carpet, showing, and they all know Michael Thompson, and who do you want invited? And they'd send us, email addresses and names and phone numbers, and we reached out to each person and gave them a personal invite, on behalf of each of the constituents. So that was really a prisoner organized event, which is kind of incredible, right? I mean, that's rare. I hope to do more things like that because I don't think it's something that's often done.
And the Cresco CEO flew in, as well as his head of social equity development flew in also too to help introduce the film. Dee Dee Kirkwood, filmmaker and Michael Thompson supporter from California, flew in also. Michael Toohey drove down from Traverse City. There were quite a few people from around the place. I saw Sam Riddle, by the way, Adam Brook. Sam Riddle was there.
Yeah, Sam and Michael Thompson go way back. They've got a lot of history together, and Sam's a big supporter. Michael Thompson's been on his show. But yeah, Charlie, the CEO of Cresco Labs, he brought his family, actually introduced his children to Miko. So that was powerful. And Chima from Cresco, he's great. He's talk to him on a regular basis. He's a true believer in the work we're doing, and he kind of heads up the social justice work for Cresco Labs. And he's the one who is actually I'm coordinating with right now. He's flying me and Michael Thompson out to California, Palm Springs, for this next film festival. So good work happening there, and good people. So.
Well, that's an alignment that seems to be doing very well for Michael, and it's clearly helping people who are still incarcerated as well. What's next for the Michael Thompson Clemency Project? I'm sorry, Jamie, were you trying to get in?
I'm saying it's a powerful way to get this message out and make it clear to people why this is such an issue. Where these changes are obviously necessary, and how strong an effect it has on one person has on so many other people. That was a very moving part of that film, I thought.
Considering the success of this film, are there plans for a second, or maybe a film he might be associated with that covers the prison issue?
I don't know anything about that. I do know that they have continued to collect professional video footage of say, like the event that we did, just did in Flint, the showing, and the speakers, etc. So there's definitely footage still being collected. I don't know what the plan is with it, but I would certainly love it if a follow-up story was done, because what's so exciting about the work we're doing is that Michael Thompson's story doesn't end with him getting out, right? In fact, it just gets more interesting. And I truly believe, you say what's next. I truly believe what's next is, we've already got Clemency sitting before the governor. We're going to have more on her desk. And she has said to us, get them on my desk. And so we have every reason to believe she's going to sign at least some of them. And I tell you what, when Michael Thompson, the work of Michael Thompson starts getting more people out, the word's going to get around, and we're going to have a lot of people we're working with, and I think our organization's going to grow, and we're going to be fighting for a lot of people.
Now, Michigan, of course, has plenty of work, but are you thinking about taking this into the federal prison system too? I can think of several, people in the federal system that don't deserve to be there any longer.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, we've been given a list of cannabis prisoners on a national level that we've been asked to start working on, and it's a little overwhelming. We've really chosen to focus our efforts on the 12 particular individuals, 12 cases that we're getting these commutations filed. But as we get these filed and get some more sort of bandwidth, we do have national cases to start working on, and national cannabis cases. So thank you for asking. And I know that we'll be wanting to rope you guys in on this stuff as well, because I know you are interested.
Thank you. Jamie.
And we got like 10 minutes left, but, this is something we'll follow up on. We know there's going to be some developments, and definitely interested in highlighting the release of more people.
Yeah, towards freedom. mtclemency@gmail.com. There was a how do we get in touch. Mike and I share that email, so we'll see it there. That's just mtclemency, CLEMENCY @gmail.com. And that's our website as well, mtclemency.com. You can contact us through that as well. It's contact and donate buttons and all the stories of people, and that website's going to keep evolving. We just had a pretty successful program be developed, really highlighting the stories of our people. So we'll get that kind of digitized in coming weeks.
People can contact you at mtclemency.com, right?
Yep, or at Gmail, both.
mtclemency@gmail.com is the email.
That makes sense. Okay. All right, so there is somebody here, Todd from Grateful Meds, which is a excellent company, great product, and he's interested in trying to help out. So I'll make sure that the email's in the chat.
And for any potential donors, we've actually got you guys are learning of this first. We literally just yesterday got a news from the IRS that we now have a 501c3 status. So woo! That's
very exciting.
Big step for us.
That's almost miraculous. They said there's a 9-month wait maybe, and it took us a month. We got so I think we got our shit together and made it happen. So that feels good.
Nice.
So a charitable contribution under a lot of circumstances. I'm giving money to the organization, so that's cool too.
501c3 is nonprofit status for those who aren't familiar. So that's a big deal when you're talking about where people want to put their money. If it's a for-profit company, sometimes you don't get those donations, but having a nonprofit makes a big deal. So congratulations. And we are the first to get this news, huh? Thanks.
That's right.
I
first.
I got a question. What can you put a dollar amount on a clemency project that you do, like to get an individual to the point where you're, applying for his clemency and it may be granted? What kind of funding does that take?
Well, so it's hard to put an exact number on a case because they're all different.
Right.
I can tell you that broadly speaking, we put together a $65,000 budget for 1 year with a goal of collecting the information, filing the clemencies for 12 individuals, and also putting on educational events and and doing the, you know, all the legal work. So hiring attorneys.
I get it.
Well, I lost Mike. But yeah, he laid it out, you know. That 65K was our budget line, and, you know, it's sticking pretty true to that.
Oh, it's good to know.
Nice. Well, great success with these 12. You said you have some of them already on the governor's desk and a few more about to be dropped on there. So
That's right.
You know, Mike, you're muted, man. If you're trying to talk, whatever happened muted you for a second, and there you go.
Oh, sorry. I don't know when I muted out on that.
Oh, you're good.
Give us a recap, man. You were going off. I saw some passion that you were saying, but I couldn't hear you.
So I was getting a phone call from a prisoner, and I tried to take it because it's crazy. But even on a live podcast, I'm like, oh my God, I can't miss this call, because you don't know when these guys are going to be able to call. Right? I feel really bad, actually. I just missed that call because it's just you know, they get access to the phones when they get access to the phones. So it's really, you can't really schedule stuff. And
does the MDOC have electronics yet, like tablets and stuff?
Some guys are able to get tablets, but it doesn't seem to be super common as far as I can tell. I think it probably is different from facility to facility. They all seem to have somewhat access to JPay, which is you know, sort of a prison email service, which is how we communicate with most of the guys. And then we keep you know, basically our project, we keep money on our phone cards so that, you know, prisoners can call us for free whenever they need to. And we try to just always be ready to take those calls.
That's cool.
Yeah, and Rick, we do have cases on people on the governor's desk. Corey McCullough, Horace Peterson, Rudy Gamo. Those are all constituents of ours, and we have more coming. You know, they're very close. Within weeks, they file. You know, it's hard. It's a balancing act of, you want to get it right. You know, you don't, we are learning as we go. There's a good phrase on Core and Par, yet I am learning. That is powerful to this work. And it's, you have to wait 2 years since filing your last one. And so this guy, Donald Williams, he got kind of wrangled into filing, you know, people, you know, try to find hope where you can. And it was not a good situation. It was not a well put out, you know, just a sloppy application that was not done by, you know, proper help. And so that jeopardizes his future applications, but he has to wait now 2 years from that. And so his actually got bounced back to us, and that kind of looks bad. But, you know, we're learning these things, and getting letters of support takes time. Family members, that's a big part of this movie. That's really, you know, what's next is getting letters of support, building off that success of 200 people in the same room. To write letters of support of the Michael Thompson Clemency Project, but also individual stories. So that's what's next on my plate.
Right on. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Just thank you so much for having us on your show. It's a pleasure to be here and share our story.
Thanks a lot, man. No, we'll do it again. We'll get some updates and talk about what's going on here in a few weeks, probably, because I really like the fact that you guys are making some progress and appreciate the work. And really appreciate that platform. Yep. No problem. Hey, Adam, anything you want to add?
No, I would suggest if you got some money, throw it at these guys.
Man, it looks like Todd, Grateful Meds, likes the effort.
He's a big fan.
So that's cool.
I mean,
let's connect.
I understand where they're coming from and what needs to be done. Yeah, I would look more into it if I were others. So, and I will be.
Right on. And thanks to Lev and Anton, who had to split a little bit early. And really appreciated both of these discussions, actually. I guess both of them could have taken up the whole show if you wanted to go that way.
Yeah, I caught that. I'll probably tune back and catch the beginning of that last discussion. That was good. The testing and kind of where that's at. It's certainly the industry seems a little bit at a crossroad in some respects. People dropping off and see who's going to fill some holes.
Yeah, see what shakes out. There's got to be a few changes to accommodate the reality of the weirdness going on here.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick, you want to wrap us up?
Well, I sure will. Respect. Let's talk about that. I mean, sometimes people have it ripped away from them like Michael Thompson did. Sometimes people lose respect based on their own behavior like Viridis has. And sometimes an entire industry loses the respect of the people that it services because of one or two bad actors. But what we really see is that now is an opportunity to correct some of those problems. Can't always correct the Michael Thompsons of the world, but we can do everything we can to try and help them out. We can't correct all the Viridises in the world, but we can get them out of our goddamn market, and we can get solutions that restore confidence in the cannabis testing industry itself. We can never forget the people that are suffering still from the drug war and the years long, the decades long curse that it has been upon our nation. And each individual little fire, like the one from the Michael Thompson Clemency Project, or that from the Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition, or Michigan MiNORML, all those little fires together are how we burn out the demon that still remains. So continue forward, and thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Peace.
Have a good week. Signing off.